Jack Carter had endured his fair share of lousy days in the sprawling void of space, but being yanked out of hyperspace and into an alien warship's tractor beam took the cake. One moment, his battered cargo freighter, the wily Jackal, had been coasting on autopilot, humming along its monotonous trade route to deliver industrial parts to the mining colonies on Vega 12. The next, alarms blared, lights flickered, and the ship's navigational systems froze. Before he could even curse, a brilliant blue beam engulfed the freighter, dragging it into the cavernous maw of a gleaming alien vessel. "Great. Pirates," Jack muttered, strapping on his antique plasma pistol, a weapon more ornamental than functional, and shoving a cigar stub between his teeth. When the airlock hissed open, however, Jack quickly realized he wasn't dealing with your average opportunistic space raiders. The figures that stepped into his ship wore elegant, shimmering armor that seemed to pulse with an inner glow, their feline-like eyes scanning the cabin. Their skin ranged from silvery blue to obsidian black, and intricate gold patterns adorned their angular faces like regal tattoos. Pilot Jack Carter of Sol 3, one of them intoned in a melodious voice, bowing slightly. "You will come with us. The High Daughter commands it." High Daughter? Jack considered resisting, but the soldiers' weapons, sleek energy rifles that hummed menacingly, quickly dissuaded him. With a resigned sigh, he allowed himself to be escorted out, marveling at the alien vessel as they marched him through its polished corridors. The warship was a marvel of engineering, all sweeping curves and glowing runes, as though someone had fused a cathedral with a predator. Through the massive viewport at the heart of the ship, he saw a planet below, a jewel of swirling clouds and crystalline oceans that glittered under twin suns. And then he saw her, seated on a raised dais in a throne of obsidian and light. The High Daughter was breathtaking. Her skin shimmered like starlight, and her cascading hair glowed faintly, shifting hues like an aurora. Her eyes, large and feline, locked onto Jack with an intensity that made him forget to breathe. "Welcome, Jack Carter," she said, her voice resonating like a chime in his chest. Jack cleared his throat, determined to play it cool. "Yeah, hi. Mind explaining why your goons yanked me out of hyperspace? I've got a schedule to keep, lady." A ripple of amusement passed through the alien soldiers, but the High Daughter merely inclined her head. "I am Saria, High Daughter of the Alyrian Dominion. And you, Jack Carter, have been chosen." "Chosen for what?" Jack demanded, his unease growing. Her smile was both regal and mischievous. "To be my champion, of course. You will help me claim my rightful place as the ruler of Alyria." Jack's jaw dropped. "Whoa, hold on. I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm a cargo pilot, not a knight in shining armor. I don't even know what an Alyria is." Saria rose from her throne, descending the dais with fluid grace. "Alyria is my homeworld, and our people are at a crossroads. The succession to the throne is contested. Only by proving my strength through ancient trials can I secure my rule. I have chosen you to stand as my champion in these trials." Jack blinked. "And you think I'm qualified for this because—" "You possess the qualities I require," Saria said cryptically, her gaze unwavering. "Your daring, your resilience, and your defiance of fate itself make you unique among the candidates I observed." Jack's head swam. Observed? Had he been under some kind of alien surveillance? "Look, I think you've made a mistake. I'm not daring. I'm just a guy who runs freight and occasionally cheats at cards. Find someone else." "You misunderstand," Saria said, her tone cooling. "This is not a request." Jack opened his mouth to protest, but then she leaned closer, her luminous eyes locking onto his. "And there is another matter." "Yeah? What's that?" Her smile turned coy. "I propose an alliance through union, a marriage, as your people might call it. Together, we shall stand stronger against those who would challenge me." Jack reeled back as though she'd slapped him. "Marriage? Lady, I don't even know you." "You will," she said simply. Jack's objections fell on deaf ears. Within hours, he was outfitted in a sleek suit of alien armor that bonded uncomfortably with his skin and thrust into a sprawling chamber lined with roaring alien spectators. The arena's floor shifted and twisted beneath his feet, morphing into an elaborate battlefield. Saria's voice echoed in his helmet. You must survive the first trial, Jack. Do not disappoint me. Survive? He barked, just as a massive, multi-limbed creature burst from the shadows, its mandibles clacking ominously. Jack dove out of the way as the creature's razor-sharp claws swiped at him, his heart pounding. He fumbled with the alien weapon Saria's soldiers had handed him, a sleek gauntlet that fired bursts of plasma and fired wildly, managing to scorch the creature's flank. The crowd roared, and Jack could swear Saria's laughter chimed in his ear. After narrowly surviving the trial, Jack found himself dragged deeper into the labyrinthine politics of Alyria. Saria's rivals, other royal claimants, each with their own champions, watched him with suspicion and disdain. Some, like Prince Kale, a charismatic and ruthless warrior with smoldering golden eyes, openly mocked his human origins. You expect this primate to win your crown for you, Saria? Kale sneered during a royal council meeting. You must be more desperate than I thought. Saria's calm smile never faltered. You underestimate him at your peril, Kale. Humans are full of surprises. But Jack could sense the growing tensions among Saria's inner circle. Her advisors whispered of betrayals, alliances, and assassinations. And then there was Saria herself. Despite her commanding presence, Jack caught glimpses of vulnerability in her, a fleeting sadness in her gaze when she thought no one was watching. Against his better judgment, Jack found himself drawn to her. He wanted to understand her world, her burdens, and why she had chosen him of all people. As the trials escalated, so did the stakes. Jack found himself facing not just monstrous beasts and cunning rivals, but also the weight of Saria's expectations. Each victory brought them closer to the throne and deeper into danger. But as Jack's bond with Saria deepened, he began to question everything. Why had she truly chosen him? What secrets was she hiding about the trials and their true purpose? And could he really trust her? Or was he just another pawn in her quest for power? The story teeters on the brink of revelation as alliances shift, enemies close in, and Jack discovers that the fate of more than just Alyria may rest in his hands. What happens next? Jack sat in his quarters, staring at the alien armor draped over the chair. Its sleek design gleamed with runes that he didn't understand, yet he could feel the faint hum of its energy. It was a reminder of how far from home he was, and how much further he might have to go. Saria's voice interrupted his thoughts. Jack, she said through the comm panel on the wall, her tone measured. There's something you need to know before the next trial. Jack turned, his eyebrows knitting in suspicion. Let me guess. The next trial's even deadlier than the last, and I should be thanking you for dragging me into this circus. Saria appeared on the screen, her image flickering slightly. Her expression was serious, her radiant eyes soft with something Jack couldn't quite place. Regret? It is not the trial that concerns me, she said. It is the others. My rivals are not bound by honor as I am. They will do anything to claim the throne, even if it means targeting you outside the arena. Jack snorted. Oh good. More assassination attempts. That's just what I needed. I am not jesting, Jack. Saria leaned forward, her tone sharpening. You are my champion, but you are also vulnerable. My enemies see your humanity as a weakness, a flaw they can exploit. Do not trust anyone, even those who claim to be your allies. Jack studied her carefully, searching for any sign that this was some kind of manipulation. You're telling me this now? Why not before I nearly got eaten by a giant bug? Her gaze dropped for the briefest moment. Because I hoped it would not come to this. But you must understand, Jack, Alyria is not like your world. Here, power is survival, and trust is a luxury I cannot afford. Jack leaned back, crossing his arms. And where does that leave us, Princess? Am I just another piece on your game board? For the first time, Saria looked genuinely hurt. Is that what you think of me? Jack hesitated. I don't know what to think anymore. You plucked me out of my life, threw me into this mess, and now I'm supposed to fight your battles and watch my back at the same time. So yeah, forgive me if I'm not feeling all warm and fuzzy about our partnership. Saria straightened, the vulnerability in her expression replaced by a regal calm. Believe what you will, Jack. But if you want to survive what's coming, you'll need to trust me, even if I cannot promise to trust you in return. The next trial took place in an arena carved into the cliffs of Alyria's southern hemisphere. The air was thick with heat, the twin suns casting jagged shadows across the battlefield. Saria's rivals and their champions gathered on platforms above, their regal attire glittering like knives. Jack stood at the edge of the arena, his alien gauntlet humming faintly in his hand. He scanned the crowd and spotted Prince Kale watching him with a predatory smirk. "You look nervous, human," Kale called down, his voice dripping with mockery. Perhaps Saria has finally realized she's backed the wrong champion. A shame. I almost feel sorry for you. Jack flipped him a rude gesture. "Don't worry, Your Highness. I'll try not to hurt your ego too much when I win." The crowd murmured in amusement, but Kale's golden eyes narrowed. The trial began with a deafening gong, and the battlefield erupted into chaos. Mechanical constructs burst from hidden compartments in the ground, their spindly limbs armed with energy blades. Jack ducked as one lunged at him, its blade slicing the air where his head had been moments before. He fired his gauntlet, the plasma blast scorching the construct's torso, but another one was already advancing. Jack cursed, rolling to avoid its attack. "Jack, to your left." Saria's voice barked through his helmet. He pivoted just in time to see another construct closing in, its blade raised. Jack fired blindly, the plasma shot grazing its head. Sparks flew, and the construct collapsed in a heap of twisted metal. "Nice save," he muttered, panting. But as the trial dragged on, Jack began to notice something odd. The constructs weren't just targeting him. They were hurting him, steering him toward a specific part of the battlefield. It wasn't until he reached the far edge of the arena that he saw why. A figure stepped out from the shadows, a tall, armored figure with a curved blade glowing faintly in one hand. It was Kale's champion, a hulking alien with violet skin and glowing red eyes. "Jack Carter," the champion rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "Your trial ends here." Jack swallowed hard. Of course it does. The fight was brutal. The champion moved with inhuman speed, his blade slicing through the air in deadly arcs. Jack barely managed to dodge, his gauntlet firing plasma blasts that the alien deflected with ease. "I've got to get one of those swords," Jack muttered, ducking under another swing. As the champion pressed the attack, Jack's mind raced. He couldn't outmatch this guy in strength or skill, but maybe he didn't have to. He glanced around the arena, his eyes darting to the jagged cliffs above. An idea formed, reckless and half-baked, but it was all he had. Jack dodged another strike and bolted toward the edge of the arena. The champion pursued, his blade glowing ominously. "Running won't save you, human," the champion bellowed. "Not running," Jack muttered, baiting. At the last second, Jack dove to the ground and fired his gauntlet at the cliff above. The plasma blast struck a loose section of rock, and the entire ledge collapsed in an avalanche of stone. The champion barely had time to look up before the rocks buried him in a deafening crash. The crowd erupted in cheers and gasps, but Jack barely noticed. He collapsed to his knees, panting. "Jack!" Saria's voice crackled in his helmet. "Are you injured?" "Only my pride," he muttered. "Tell me this trial's over." "For now," she said, a hint of relief in her tone. After the trial, Jack was escorted back to Saria's quarters. The princess greeted him with a rare smile, her eyes glinting with approval. "Well done, Jack. You've exceeded my expectations once again." "Glad I could impress," Jack said dryly, slumping into a chair. "So, what's next? Another trial? Another assassination attempt?" "Both, perhaps," Saria said, her smile fading. "But first, there's something you need to know." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Kale has made his move. He's forging an alliance with an external power, a faction that has long sought to destabilize Alyria. If he succeeds, it could mean the end of our people as we know them." Jack frowned. "And you want me to stop him?" "I want us to stop him," Saria said, "but it will require more than brute strength. We'll need cunning, strategy, and a willingness to take risks." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. Why do I get the feeling those risks are going to be all mine? Saria smiled faintly. Because you're starting to understand Alyria. Jack met her gaze, a flicker of determination sparking in his eyes. Fine, let's take down a prince. The plan was simple in theory. Infiltrate Kale's stronghold, gather evidence of his alliance with the mysterious faction, and return to the royal council with enough proof to sway the succession in Saria's favor. In practice, however, Jack knew simple was a word rarely associated with his newfound role as a champion, and even less so with alien palace intrigue. The stronghold loomed ahead, a massive structure carved into the side of a mountain. Its sleek design mirrored the grandeur of Illyrian architecture, but Jack noticed subtle differences, darker materials, harsher angles, and faint energy signatures that didn't match anything he'd seen before. This place gives me the creeps, Jack muttered, crouching behind a rocky outcrop with Saria and her lieutenant, a taciturn warrior named Velok. It should, Velok replied, scanning the perimeter with a device that resembled binoculars fused with an ornate staff. Kale's allies are known for their unconventional methods. Saria adjusted her cloak, which shimmered to blend with her surroundings. We must tread carefully. If Kale discovers us here, he will claim provocation and use it to justify outright war. Jack snorted. Yeah, because sneaking into his house isn't provocative at all. Saria shot him a withering look. Are you always this insubordinate? Only when I'm not getting paid. Before Saria could respond, Velok raised a hand. Enough. The patrols are thinning. Now is the time. They moved swiftly, slipping through the jagged terrain toward an access tunnel partially concealed by overgrown vines. Saria led the way, her movements fluid and precise. Jack tried to mimic her grace, but ended up tripping on a loose rock, catching himself against the wall with a grunt. You would not last a day in the Illyrian Guard, Velok muttered. Yeah, well, I didn't sign up for this, Jack shot back, keeping his voice low. I got drafted, remember? Enough, Saria whispered sharply. Stay focused. Inside, the tunnel descended deep into the mountain, its walls lined with alien glyphs that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Jack's unease grew with every step. Something about the place felt wrong, like the air itself was charged with malice. They reached a large chamber guarded by two hulking constructs, similar to the ones Jack had faced in the trial. Velok tapped a series of runes on his staff-like device, and the constructs powered down, their glowing eyes dimming. You're handy to have around, Jack whispered. Velok didn't respond, but Saria allowed herself a small smile. The lab is just ahead, she said. Stay close. The chamber opened into a sprawling laboratory filled with strange machinery. Tall, cylindrical tanks lined the walls, each containing a suspended figure. Jack froze when he saw what was inside. Are those people? He asked, his voice tinged with horror. Saria's expression darkened. No, they are constructs, artificial beings. But these designs are not Illyrian. Velok stepped closer to one of the tanks, examining the glowing runes etched into its base. This technology, it's not just foreign. It's ancient. Jack frowned. Ancient how? Like, pyramid ancient or scary ancient? Scary, Velok said grimly. Before Jack could respond, a low hum filled the air. The machines around them activated, and the tanks began to glow brighter. Velok, Saria barked. I don't know what triggered it, Velok said, frantically tapping runes on his device. But we must leave now. The nearest tank cracked open with a hiss, and its occupant stepped out. The construct was humanoid but elongated, with unervingly smooth skin and glowing red eyes. It turned toward them, its movements unnaturally fluid. Oh, fantastic, Jack muttered, raising his plasma gauntlet. The construct lunged, faster than anything Jack had ever seen. He barely managed to fire a blast of plasma, which struck its shoulder but didn't slow it down. Velok stepped forward, his staff unfolding into a gleaming spear. With a swift, practiced motion, he drove the weapon into the construct's chest, and it crumpled to the ground, its body sparking. More tanks began to open, their occupants emerging one by one. This is bad, Jack said, backing toward the exit. This is really bad. Keep moving. Saria commanded, her own weapon, a blade of shimmering light, springing to life. They fought their way back toward the tunnel, the constructs closing in from all sides. Jack's gauntlet overheated after too many consecutive shots, forcing him to resort to throwing debris at one construct to slow it down. "Come on, you piece of junk," he growled, slamming the gauntlet against the wall. Saria sliced through another construct with a graceful arc of her blade, then grabbed Jack's arm. "Move." They burst out of the lab and into the tunnel, Velik sealing the door behind them with a series of rapid taps on his device. "That won't hold them for long," Velik said, breathing heavily. "Then we'd better not stick around," Jack replied. Back aboard Saria's ship, the three of them reviewed the data Velik had managed to extract from the lab. The holographic display in the war room projected a series of images, schematics of the constructs, maps of Alyria, and, most disturbingly, a transmission log. "This confirms it," Saria said, her voice grim. "Kale is working with the Zarinth Collective." Jack frowned. "Who are the Zarinth?" "A nomadic faction," Velik explained. "Once thought to be extinct. They seek to dominate through technology, enslaving, or destroying those who oppose them. If they are aiding Kale, his ambition is far greater than we imagined." Saria turned to Jack, her expression intense. "Do you understand what this means? If Kale wins the throne with the Zarinth at his side, Alyria will fall, and the Dominion will become a tool of conquest for the collective." Jack ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "So what's the plan? Expose him to the council?" "They will demand undeniable proof," Saria said, "and Kale will be ready with counterarguments and lies. If we want to stop him, we must do more than reveal the truth. We must destroy his alliance before it can take root." Jack leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He hadn't signed up for a galactic power struggle, but now it seemed like the fate of an entire civilization rested on his shoulders. "All right," he said finally. "Let's take the fight to Kale. But next time, can we try not to wake up the murder robots?" Saria's lips curved into a faint smile. "I'll see what I can do." The revelation of Kale's alliance with the Zarinth Collective changed everything. Jack, Saria, and Velik couldn't simply bring the proof to the council and expect a resolution. Kale had already embedded himself too deeply in Alyria's power structure. Saria's rivals were either cowed by his displays of strength or tempted by the collective's promises of technological dominance. "We need to cut off Kale's leverage," Saria said, pacing in the war room aboard her starship. The soft glow of Alyria's planet filled the viewport behind her. "Without the collective, he's nothing but an ambitious princeling with too many enemies." Jack rubbed his temples, his fatigue catching up to him. "And how exactly do we cut off a faction that probably has murder bots stashed on every moon in this system? They're not going to just roll over because we asked nicely." Velik leaned forward, tapping a command into the console. A new holographic display appeared, showing a massive orbital structure. "This," he said, "is the Zarintha's mobile command hub. It's hidden in the asteroid belt just beyond Alyria's outer moon." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Hidden? Huh? How'd you find it?" "I spent years in reconnaissance before becoming Saria's lieutenant," Velik replied tersely. "And the collective underestimates us. Their arrogance leaves trails if you know where to look." Saria studied the hologram. "If we destroy this hub, it will cripple their operations in this sector. Kale's alliance will collapse without their support." "Okay, sure," Jack said, gesturing vaguely at the hologram. "We just waltz into the most heavily fortified space station in the system and blow it up. Piece of cake." Saria met his sarcasm with a calm, determined gaze. "It won't be easy, but we have an advantage. They don't know we've discovered their location. With the right plan, we can strike before they're prepared." Velik nodded. "We infiltrate the station, disable its defenses, and plant charges in its reactor core. Once we're clear, the station will implode." Jack groaned, slumping back in his chair. "Why do all your plans sound like suicide missions?" "Because the stakes demand it," Saria said, her voice steely. The journey to the asteroid belt was tense. Saria's warship was built for speed and stealth, but the Zarintha's patrols were relentless. Velik piloted with expert precision, weaving through the dense field of rocks and debris while avoiding detection. When they reached the station, Jack's first thought was that it looked like something out of a nightmare. The structure was jagged and asymmetrical, a chaotic tangle of black metal and glowing red veins. Its silhouette against the void was menacing, and the faint hum of energy emanating from it made Jack's skin crawl. "That's inviting," Jack muttered. "Stay focused," Saria said, her voice sharp. She adjusted the controls on her armor, which now carried an adaptive camouflage system. "Velik, are you ready?" "Always," the lieutenant replied, securing his spear-like weapon across his back. "And me?" Jack asked, checking his plasma gauntlet nervously. "What do I do? Shoot anything that moves?" "Follow orders and don't get killed," Saria said. Jack rolled his eyes. "Great pep talk." The team boarded the station using a maintenance port on the dark side of the structure. The interior was even more unsettling than the exterior. The walls pulsed faintly, as though the station itself were alive, and strange symbols flickered across surfaces in a language Jack couldn't decipher. "Does anyone else feel like this place is watching us?" he whispered. "It is," Velik said bluntly. Saria held up a hand, signaling them to stop. "Silence. There are patrols ahead." They crouched in the shadows as a group of Zarinth constructs marched past. These were different from the ones Jack had faced before. Sleeker, more advanced, and armed with energy blades that seemed to vibrate with lethal potential. When the patrol was out of sight, they moved again, navigating through twisting corridors and avoiding detection. Velik led the way, his knowledge of Zarinth architecture proving invaluable. Finally, they reached the control hub, a large chamber filled with glowing terminals and holographic displays. At its center was a towering device that pulsed with energy. "That's their defense grid," Velik said, pointing to the device. "If we disable it, the station will be vulnerable to attack." "Let's make it happen," Saria said, moving to one of the terminals. Jack stood guard, his gauntlet ready, while Velik worked on the device. But as the minutes stretched on, Jack's unease grew. Not to rush you," he said, glancing nervously at the door, "but I've got a bad feeling about this." "Almost done," Velik replied. The moment he said it, alarms blared throughout the station. "Bad feeling confirmed," Jack shouted. The door burst open, and a squad of Zarinth constructs charged in. Jack fired his gauntlet, managing to take down one of them, but the others were relentless. Saria moved with deadly precision, her blades slicing through the constructs with a grace that made Jack's efforts look clumsy in comparison. Velik finished his work on the defense grid, and the central device powered down with a deafening hum. "Grid disabled," Velik shouted. "Good," Saria said, cutting down the last construct. "Now we plant the charges." They raced toward the reactor core, fighting off waves of constructs along the way. The closer they got, the more oppressive the energy in the station became. Jack could feel it in his bones, a low, malevolent hum that seemed to sap his strength. When they reached the core, Velik and Saria set the charges while Jack held off another wave of attackers. His gauntlet overheated again, forcing him to grab a discarded energy blade from one of the constructs. "Guess I'm a sword guy now," he muttered, swinging wildly at an approaching construct. "Charges set," Saria called. "Let's move." They sprinted back toward the maintenance port, the station's alarms growing louder with each passing second. As they launched back into space, the charges detonated. The station imploded in a brilliant cascade of light and debris, the shockwave rocking Saria's ship. Jack collapsed into a chair, his chest heaving. "I am never doing that again." Saria glanced at him, a rare glimmer of amusement in her eyes. "You've said that before." "Yeah, and I meant it then too." Velik steered the ship away from the debris field, his expression grim. "We've dealt a blow to the Zarinth, but this is far from over. Kale will retaliate." Saria nodded, her gaze hardening. "Let him. For now, we've taken the first step, and when the time comes, we will finish this, once and for all." Kale's response was swift and brutal. Within days of the Zarinth station's destruction, his forces launched a coordinated strike against Saria's allies, destabilizing key outposts and sowing chaos throughout the Alyrian dominion. The council teetered on the edge of collapse, and whispers of Kale's imminent coronation spread like wildfire. For Jack, There was no turning back. His life as a simple cargo pilot was a distant memory, eclipsed by battles, intrigue, and the growing realization that the fate of an entire civilization rested in his hands. Saria summoned her inner circle aboard her flagship, Eclipsion, as the final pieces of their plan fell into place. Kale has declared himself heir to the throne, Saria said, her voice cutting through the tense air. The council convenes tomorrow for the coronation of Dominion. It will be his moment of triumph unless we act. Velik stood, his expression grim. We still lack proof strong enough to sway the council. Even with the destruction of the Zarenth station, Kale will claim it was an attack on Dominion stability, orchestrated by you. Which is why we must expose him, Saria said. Not just to the council, but to all of Alyria. Jack leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Okay, but how? Kale's got half the Dominion under his thumb, and the other half's too scared to stand against him. Even if we show up with receipts, he'll just spin it his way. Saria turned to Jack, her eyes gleaming with determination. We don't just show up with proof. We force Kale to reveal himself. And you, Jack, will play a crucial role. Of course I will, Jack muttered. I love being the bait. The grand hall of Alyria's council chamber was a sight to behold, its crystalline spires reaching toward the heavens as sunlight refracted through the stained glass, casting rainbow hues across the polished floor. Hundreds of Alyrian dignitaries filled the chamber, their whispers a low hum of anticipation as Kale ascended the dais. Draped in ceremonial armor that shimmered like molten gold, Kale looked every bit the conquering prince. His golden eyes swept the crowd, exuding confidence as he raised his hands to quiet the room. Today, Kale began, his voice resonant and commanding. We secure the future of our great dominion. Through strength, unity, and the vision of our ancestors, the chamber doors burst open with a thunderous crash, silencing Kale mid-sentence. All eyes turned as Saria strode in, flanked by Velik and Jack. Her regal attire gleamed with a silvery light, and her presence was magnetic, commanding the attention of every soul in the room. You dare interrupt this sacred ceremony? Kale snarled, his voice laced with venom. I do, Saria said, her voice steady and unyielding, because this ceremony is a farce, built on lies and treachery. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kale descended the dais, his expression darkening. You come here with accusations, yet you bring no proof. Your desperation is pathetic, Saria. Oh, I have proof, Saria said, her lips curling into a faint smile. And it comes from your own allies. At her signal, Velik activated a holographic projector. The image of the Zarenth station appeared, along with intercepted communications between Kale and the collective. The crowd murmured in shock as the recordings played, revealing Kale's promises to cede Alyrian independence in exchange for Zarenth technology. Kale's face contorted with rage, but he quickly composed himself. Do you think this fabrication will undo me? The council knows your tricks, Saria. You'll do anything to steal the throne? Saria held her ground. It's not me you need to convince, Kale. It's them. Kale's gaze flickered to the crowd, sensing the tide turning against him. Enough, he roared, drawing a blade of golden energy. You want to challenge me, Saria? Then let us settle this as our ancestors did, through combat. Winner claims the throne. The room fell silent, the gravity of his words sinking in. Jack stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. Whoa, wait a second. If you think she's gonna fight you, think again. That's my job. Kale sneered. You, a human? This isn't your fight. Jack smirked, activating his plasma gauntlet. It is now. The chamber transformed into an arena, its central platform rising and shifting into a circular battlefield. Kale and Jack faced each other, the air between them crackling with tension. You should have stayed on your primitive world, Kale said, his blade humming menacingly. Now, you'll die far from it. Jack shrugged. Maybe, but if I go down, I'm taking you with me. The duel began with a blinding clash of energy. Kale's movements were precise and brutal, his blade slicing through the air with deadly intent. Jack relied on agility and instinct, dodging and parrying as he searched for an opening. Kale pressed the attack, forcing Jack to the edge of the platform. "You're outmatched, human." "Yeah, but I'm scrappy," Jack retorted, firing a blast from his gauntlet. The shot grazed Kale's shoulder, earning a growl of pain. As the fight raged on, the crowd watched in stunned silence. Jack's defiance began to stir something in the Alyrians, a flicker of hope, a reminder that even the smallest spark could ignite change. Finally, Jack saw his chance. Kale lunged, overextending himself, and Jack sidestepped, slamming his gauntlet into Kale's side. The energy discharge sent Kale sprawling to the ground, his blade skittering out of reach. Jack stood over him, his gauntlet aimed squarely at Kale's chest. "Yield," Jack said, his voice steady. Kale glared up at him, his pride warring with his defeat. Slowly, he lowered his head. Kale's surrender marked the end of his claim to the throne. The council, swayed by the evidence and Jack's victory, proclaimed Saria as the rightful ruler of Alyria. As the chamber erupted into cheers, Saria turned to Jack, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You've done more than I could have ever asked, Jack. You didn't just fight for me. You fought for all of Alyria." Jack scratched the back of his neck, a sheepish grin on his face. "Yeah, well, let's not make a habit of it. I've got a cargo route to get back to." Saria's smile faltered, a hint of sadness in her gaze. "You could stay, you know. There's a place for you here." Jack hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. He looked out at the crowd, at the world he had fought to save, and felt a strange pull in his chest. "I'll think about it," he said finally. As Alyria celebrated its new queen, Jack Carter realized that his adventure was far from over. Whether he stayed among the stars or returned to the quiet life of a cargo pilot, one thing was certain: he would never be the same.